if you really couldn't tell by the way I talk about this band every time I mention them, whether it's a review or just generally talking about them, my views on Asking Alexandria have evolved and changed over the time. When I first heard of them and heard them, I wasn't interested. I kind of dismissed them as a generic metalcore band and really just felt like they were riding a trend. But that's kind of changed after listening to their discography, and especially more recently, I really have grown to kind of appreciate them and what they've brought to the metalcore scene. And I was just starting to kind of get into them when the whole thing with Danny Worsnop happened and he left the band, replaced by Dennis Stoff. I did review The Black and re-reviewed it this year. You can go check that out. But I didn't really feel like Dennis Stoff was so much of a great fit for the band. I mean, hearing him live, I think he was better at covering Asking Alexandria than he was actually being in the band and making his own creative material and bringing something unique, vocally at least, to the band. So I'm happy that Danny Worsnop is back in the band now. There was definitely something that was a pleasant surprise when they announced it earlier this year that he would be back and they'd be writing new material. And it kind of left me wondering, what would the new material sound like? I mean, Danny Worsnop had been off doing his own thing with his other band as well as his solo work, and they'd been drastically different than anything Asking Alexandria had really done. There was a bit of a disconnect on the album, the last album that they had with him, From Death to Destiny, and it was kind of, you kind of felt the behind the scenes issues that were going on with that album. It did kind of come out, so it was really kind of up in the air as far as what to expect from the new music that we'd get from the band. And they've released a track called Into the Fire and a music video for that track, and I am actually very happy with this song. I think I definitely like the direction they're going, and I think it suits all of them very well. I mean, obviously Danny Worsnop has been kind of pushing into the more softer, hard alternative rock, whatever you want to call it, like the adult alternative style of rock and roll, things like that, and less into the screaming and the metalcore and the hard breakdowns, things like that. And the band themselves, based on what we heard with the album The Black, had kind of been pushing more towards not to say poppier sound, but a kind of more accessible sound. I mean, they've always kind of had that, but they've always kind of been heavier in general. And I think they're kind of starting to push more into something that's more palatable to mainstream audiences in general, such as getting radio play, things like that. If MTV was still a thing, these would be, The Black would definitely have some tracks on there that would probably be played, and I think they were kind of pushing towards that. I think Danny Worsnop was, again, pushing in a bit of a different direction, but I think that they've kind of blended everything well together with the song Into the Fire, as well as going off in a new direction entirely, and at the same time bringing things back. To comment on his vocal work on here, I think it's fantastic. You don't get any sense of that he's straining himself or anything like that. When he starts to scream, there's a little bit of that. It's the transitioning, I think, is a little bit rough when he goes into the screaming, especially towards the end, that kind of staccato, fast-paced breakdown part. You really kind of hear it in there, but I think in general he's definitely has a great control over his voice still, despite the fact that you can clearly hear that it's changed. I think his clean vocals have improved drastically over previous albums, and just in general, I think the transitioning from the clean to these wide open choruses, there's it's a much easier and a better transition overall for him. I think he did an excellent job. For the rest of the band, I think that they've kind of stepped things up a little bit with this track. I definitely like the guitar riff that kind of backs everything together. I like how all the instruments definitely you feel everything. It doesn't feel like anything's kind of getting lost. I hear the bass, I hear the drumming. There's some interesting parts with that. And then again, the guitar work, absolutely. The video itself is really interesting. They've kind of taken this Sin City style approach of the black and white with some splashes of color and the comic book style kind of approach to things. And I think it makes for an interesting music video overall. It leaves you kind of on a cliffhanger It shows essentially Danny Worsnop driving through the city in, you see Danny Worsnop in a white jacket driving through the city and seeing the aftermath of these crashes of the other band members. And then you see Danny Worsnop with a black jacket running them over and basically causing their crashes. And then they kind of meet at the end and hit each other. And I don't know whether that's any kind of commentary for the band as far as what went on with them or anything like that. I don't know if it's supposed to be a message about anything. I don't know what the message would be necessarily, but I think it really makes for an interesting music video. I think it's again, very stylized. And you have a cohesive narrative. You do know what's going on. You get a sense of everything. Obviously you don't know, if you don't know the band, you don't know who each of these are. But at the same time, it also kind of does a good job of showing what happened, who the band members are, and then who they are in the band itself. It'll flash, to their bassist and the I think rhythm guitarist in one crash, and then or bassist and drummer, I forgot which, are in the two that are in the car, and then it will flash to them in the the live footage of them playing the song. So I think overall they did an excellent job with the music video, and again the track itself I think is a solid standout track. A lot of people are comparing it to what Bring Me the Horizon did with their last album, That's the Spirit. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think That's the Spirit was a little bit more experimental in a lot of ways. This kind of feels a little bit more straightforward. It feels like what Asking Alexandria has kind of done. It doesn't feel as much of a departure necessarily compared to what That's the Spirit was. I kind of understand where those comparisons are coming from, especially when you have two UK-based metalcore bands that kind of came up during the same era, and now they're making similar sounding music again. But I don't think that it's a ripoff, a copy, or even the same as what Bring Me the Horizon really did. I think it's uniquely Asking Alexandria. I personally would like something a little bit more heavier, but that's the same thing with the last album, The Black. The first single they released was a kind of power ballady kind of track, and then on the actual album there were heavier tracks on there overall. So I'm kind of expecting that with this album. I'm not expecting it to all sound exactly like this, but it'll be interesting to hear more, and I really can't wait to review this album. That was the review of Asking Alexandria's new song, Into the Fire. Let me know what you think of the song down below in the comments. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more.